In this video, we're going to talk about the traits, skills, and methods of the strategic thinker. This is irrelevant to what the process is that they're a part of, whether it's one person, 20 people, large organization, small organization. The point is that a strategic thinker is a capability that an individual can possess. And while I believe some are built for it more than others, I think we can all develop that trait, that capability more in ourselves. So what I want to talk about are the traits, skills, and methods because to me there's no process that makes up for a lack of strategic thinking. If I had to choose between a strategic thinker and a very good strategic process, I would choose that strategic thinker all day long. Now, as the other videos talk about, it's best when we can put them all together. But we still need that strategic thinking capability, so let's go through it. The first trait I want to talk about is being open-minded. This means that we're open to new inputs, we're oriented as a learner, we seek ideas and challenge our assumptions. Now this is a very broad statement, but it can show up in a lot of different ways. Some are proactive, open-minded, meaning they go off and find new ways to integrate ideas, thoughts, information into their world. These are generally people that really actually seek it out. They try new things on themselves and they love testing new materials. The other could be that they're simply open to it when it happens, but when it happens they recognize it quickly and embrace that moment. The second trait is being risk tolerant. Now, this does not mean that we're being risky, that we like to take risks. Now, someone that likes to take risk might be strategic as well, but this is not about pursuing risk. This is about embracing risk. This is about engaging with that risk. We're not afraid of it. We don't avoid it, but when that risk is there, we confront it head on and manage our way through it. We look at it as a variable, not as a reason not to do something. So being risk tolerant means that we can absorb that risk, we can work our way through it. This does not mean that we're simply being a risky person. And the last is fundamentally being not a victim. Now, what does that really mean to not be a victim? Well, I like to use the word responsible. But really flip it around in the fact that we as humans are able to choose our response. This means when something bad happens, do we focus on the part that we can't do anything about and become a victim? Or do we take responsibility and focus on the part that we can control? And that really is what avoiding the victim mentality is as a trait, is that we focus on the factors that we can control. We don't get bogged down worrying about the things that we can't control. Focus in on those, identify those things we can control, and manage those with all of our focus. Those three traits, open-minded, risk-tolerant, and avoiding being a victim, are three traits that I believe make up an effective strategic thinker. The next category to talk about are the skills that I believe good strategic thinkers use. This is, again, looking at many strategic thinkers that I know or have studied and looking at what's common across that set of people. So the first of three that I want to talk about is being able to see and comprehend patterns. Seeing the patterns in how society works or how an organization works or how people consume things, seeing those patterns, comprehending those patterns are key to finding new opportunities. Starbucks found a pattern in how people worked and how people lived, which is really what was behind their being a third place destination behind work and home. And as a result, it's not that they didn't focus on coffee, but they focused on being a place that people could work, being a place that people could meet. And their focus on that environment was not about what was going on in coffee shops. It was what was going on in the world. It was what was going on in society. And seeing and comprehending that pattern becomes critical. Companies like Airbnb and Uber were formed based on the idea that this sort of side hustle culture this gig economy, that people wanted a side hustle. They wanted a way to drive their own income, and you could either go find one yourself or take advantage of one that was offered, and they found an opportunity to offer that. So being able to see and comprehend these patterns becomes fundamental because you can start to see where they take you over time. The second skill is the skill of transference. It's really being able to take a situation, a solution, or a concept from one situation and applying it to another. So a great example of this is a very common strategy is to become the Netflix of your market, right? Whether it's razor blades or underwear, finding a way to make it a subscription-based model. Not that Netflix was the first subscription, but it was one that changed fundamentally how people consumed movies. And so they want to do that same thing to their particular market. Now, it doesn't have to be about the entire business model. It could be simply a solution around the point of sale, around the way a product is packaged, a way it's designed, but it's transferring some trait, characteristic, solution from one situation to another. And being able to understand why did it work here and what's going to make it work in my situation. The third skill is really being able to be decisive in the face of ambiguity. Strategy is always an ambiguity. You're based on the unknowns. You're carving a path that you don't fundamentally know will be successful. So you have to make decisions in the face of ambiguity. And being able to make those decisions, knowing what to pay attention to and what not to, is a critical skill for the strategic thinker. I go back to my own history, and when we were reshaping the product portfolio of Chrysler Corporation many years ago. And the very first Dodge Ram that was meant to be a stylized vehicle was first tested with focus groups. Now, the data, the way it would typically get scored, would come back and say this design is an absolute loser. 80% of people hated the idea. But the key decision makers in this process, Bob Lutz being one of those key people, saw something else in the data. They saw other things around how much people that did love it, how much they really did love it. And so despite the ambiguity about how much people hated it versus loved it, was able to make a decision about a product portfolio that ended up being a huge success. Again, traditional scoring methods would have said avoid that decision altogether. So this is a key skill, being able to take the data, it not being clear, it not giving you the answer, and still being able to be decisive and move forward, not getting stuck in that ambiguity. So these three skills, seeing and comprehending pattern, being able to transfer from one situation to the next, and being able to be decisive in the face of ambiguity, are three skills that I believe every strategic thinker has and must cultivate. The last category I want to talk about are the methods that strategic thinkers employ. These are things that you find them working in some way or the other, but they are practices, they are habits, they are methods that they use and integrate into their style of work. The first is practicing. Actually practicing being a strategic thinker. Now this includes both exploring ideas, alternatives, and strategies, but also deciding, being able to practice that decision process. They don't wait for that one big moment to come up and then simply execute that in a flawless way. They practice for it. Now, whether they deliberately practice or practice is just ingrained in how they work, there's high repetitions of that strategic thought process in place. Now, one place that you can get this is by coaching others. Now, some get it by serving on boards of directors, where they get to coach other CEOs on strategic decisions. I've done it in addition to the boardroom from also coaching students, where they might come up with many ideas and iterate ideas, and you have wonderful iterations to practice looking at a new strategy. The other is to simply have high iterations of your own strategies. Put lots of things in front of yourself to consider. I have a habit that I've adopted and turned on and off at different periods of my life where I force myself to come up with a new business idea once a month. Now, most of them are not things that I'm going to pursue, but it allows me to practice both creating that new idea, but also analyzing it and saying no, which is sometimes the right decision to make. So you have to find ways to practice and build this muscle of strategic thinking. Again, whether you practice naturally or you do it deliberately really doesn't matter. It's a muscle that must be exercised. The next method that I believe most strategic thinkers employ is scenario planning. Now, this doesn't have to be a process, but fundamentally, they're always playing out different scenarios. They are never locked into any one. A forecast is really just one of multiple scenarios that they consider simultaneously. But they're also always looking at the downside scenario, the upside scenario, the off the chessboard scenario. They're looking at multiple scenarios all the time. And so that practice of always looking at multiple scenarios allows you to understand risk and robustness in the strategies that you're considering. The third method that I believe most strategic thinkers employ is testing. Test, test, test. Test your assumptions, test your ideas, test your execution. That you have to build confidence over time in your strategy. You don't just decide and the confidence goes along with it. That you must test and build your confidence as you go. So strategy is an evolved process, I believe, for most strategic thinkers. And that's why testing assumptions, testing ideas, testing execution is a key part of the toolkit of a strategic thinker. Now, through this, kind of helping paint a picture of what I believe a strategic thinker is. The analogy is the craftsman. I don't believe you plan strategy and then go execute it. I believe you craft strategy. And that means it's an interactive process. I think, to me, the best analogy is that of the sculptor. The sculptor has a piece of stone that they interact with. It's not just carving away the bits that don't belong. It's also interacting and reacting to what the stone gives you. Not everything you can do based on what the stone is telling you. Its defects and its flaws and its grains are going to affect what you can do, what's going to work and what's not. And so, strategy is not about separating the work of the minds, choosing the strategy, and the hands, executing the strategy. It's about integrating them. And that's really what the craftsman is. Integration of mind and of hand. Because ultimately it all has to come together, and the master strategist is a craftsman.